Hello, hello. Hey, you guys. It is Lisa Alexander, founder and executive director of Stand Up Survivor, where we educate, empower, and equip the survivors of domestic violence and the community. I'm super excited for another Tuesday Night Live. And our special guest tonight is Katie Gillis. She is an LCSW, a licensed clinical social worker and psychotherapist who specializes in the LGBT community, domestic violence, and intimate partner abuse. Hey, Katie. Hi.
Hi.
I'm so thankful that you said yes. I'm so excited that you are here. So you guys
Thank
come
you.
on in. I'm so excited that you're here. Hey, Nina. I know that you said come in, so I'm glad that you're here. So I'm super excited about tonight's topic. So I want to tell you there was like a little bit of, oh my goodness, because I'm not the expert in this field, Katie. I don't know the specifics of how to help those people in specific situations in the LGBTQ plus community. So I found an expert who knows. Yes.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're here. So I'm just going to tell you guys the fact of the matter is I'm a woman. I'm a survivor. Hey, Tiffany, I'm a survivor of domestic violence from my ex-husband who is a man. I don't have the expertise or the education to really focus on this specific topic, but it needs to be talked about. It's so prevalent in the LGBTQ plus community, and no one deserves to be treated with any type of abuse or violence at all. And so that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So I'm going to also say that someone that you know and love is experiencing domestic violence. Someone that you know and love is within the LGBTQ plus community and is experiencing domestic violence. So that's what we're talking about tonight. So make sure that you like and share with someone, okay? All right, enough rambling. So Katie, hey, I'm so excited. So tell you, I met Katie because I have a publishing company, and Katie is actually going to be one of our authors, and she shares some of her experiences and shares topics about the LGBT plus community, and that's how we connected. And I was like, wait a minute, this is what you do. We need to connect. So Katie, tell me about your personal experience because you're also a survivor of domestic violence.
I am. It's actually my ex who's a woman. The unique story of my story is the fact that for me, the abuse happened when the relationship ended. And that is something that even for me as a clinician who I've worked with domestic violence for years, to see something manifest at the end of a relationship was something that was very new. And it was also very new to other people who I spoke with, even the legal community, other clinicians. It just was something that was new. And I just think that it's something that is not as talked about. And so I've really kind of taken that and just kind of run with it for my practice, just to educate myself, empower myself, and also empower my patients to really learn about it and find out how we can learn more about this, especially in the LGBT community.
It's funny that you say that because, of course, as I was doing research, hey, y'all, come on in here. As I was doing research is so slim. Now, if you hop on Google and you say domestic violence, you're going to get heterosexual, male to female, female to male domestic violence. But you're not going to get the statistics that are there for the LGBTQ plus community. And it blew my mind. And it also heightened my frustration level because, as both of us as researchers, we're like, to get the numbers. Someone needs to do the research because this is the problem.
And it's so interesting too, because I mean, I always say that if I had gone through my situation 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I would not have been able to seek a protection order because my relationship would not have been protected. Which to me is just amazing that that's even a thing. And that's even a question. And so that really spoke to me about the fact that we really have a lot more education to do. We've come so far, but we have a lot to really learn about.
Yeah. And I think especially in the domestic abuse era of it all, because you couldn't get a restraining order because your abuser was a woman, but if it would have been a man, it would have been a different story. So I think it's very important that we address this. And hey, thanks. It is a lot. And hey, Londi, it is a lot. Hey, Jennifer. Hey, Nina. So let me ask you a question, because you mentioned that there wasn't a domestic abuse during the relationship, but it started after. So how did that happen?
So for me, it started after. For me, it was retaliation for ending the relationship. And a lot of times with domestic abuse, people always say, oh, did you see signs? Sure. But signs are very subjective. What some person sees as a red flag, another person say, oh, that's a personality flaw. It takes a trained eye, but also an experienced eye, not just a trained eye. And so for me, the difference really was that it was retaliatory. It was blatant retaliation for ending a relationship. It was, okay, you broke my heart. I'm now going to ruin your life.
Wow.
And so it was, and it was not recognized really because of that. It took me a lot to have to fight the legal system, the police, everything from the 911 operator to the judge to get them to recognize, yes, this still is intimate partner violence if it is an ex-dating partner.
Okay, so the fact that she was a woman didn't have anything to do with it, or did it? Or was it the fact that it happened post-relationship? What was the legal system struggling with?
I think the legal system really struggles a lot with domestic abuse, to be honest. I think that they struggle with all of it. There's so much that they do not understand. And that is even with heterosexual relationships, where we have the perpetrator is the male, the survivor, the victim is a female, which is how we view most domestic violence situations in our society. Anything that deviates from that really throws people off. If you have a perpetrator who's a female, a lot of times people do not take that seriously. The police will come out and say, okay, what's going on? Two females fighting. My ex's lawyer literally said to the judge in court, Your Honor, it's two women. They're emotional. Comments like that really, it's sexist, it's homophobic. And also the fact that the relationship had already ended, and it had been over for several months, and the questions that I, used to get from the police. Oh, what did you do to make her mad? What happened now?
Wow.
Yeah. And so I just think that there needs to be, yeah.
The domestic violence was occurring after the relationship ended, because it still continues. Just because the relationship ended doesn't mean that the abuse has ended. But I think you also make a good point when you talk about we expect domestic violence to be between a man and a woman, with the man being the perpetrator and the woman being the abuser. I get flack from that all the time, because the fact of the matter is that is the majority of domestic violence.
And
it's not the only type of.
And it is the majority.
Violence. It is the majority, and women are abusers. There have been women who are abusers, and men who have lost their lives at the hand of it, of their abuser who was a female. And so that's a very, very important topic, and something to acknowledge, just like the topic we're talking about today. So Nina says that the cap started was a cat fight, and I was strangled. Survivor of 2 years. Very glad that you survived. And just like
cat fight. I literally had that phrase. For many patients of mine, they have had that word cat fight, And then Melanie says the most dangerous time is after a person leaves an abuser, and I want to say that, I want to highlight it, and I want to take a highlighter, because that is absolutely true. The most dangerous time is after a person leaves. That is true.
Yeah, absolutely. And people say, well, just leave. But what happens after that? We know it's the most dangerous time, and leaving is not easy. If leaving was easy, people would leave all the time. Laura, you're absolutely right. What a chauvinistic comment by the attorney. And I think it's ignorance. It's just a lack of knowledge too. And I know Katie, so I'm just going to dive into that real quick, because I know before we talked about how when you call the police, and you were explaining the situation to him, you're like, she did this. So like, what did he do? Well, she did this. Well, what did he do? And they kept going back to he, and you're clearly telling them. So tell us about that.
So there were several situations where I had to, call the police, everything from calling the police to navigating the courtroom. And it's constant male pronouns. I mean, everything from the bailiff to the judge. And it gets to a point where you have to make that decision. Like, do I want to allow this stereotype of a male perpetrator to unfold, because that be what gets me my protection order? Or do I want to, actually say, hey, this is what's going on? And so it just shows people automatically think male perpetrator. And like you said before, the majority are. But the thing is that we just need to know that they're not exclusively male. There are many women who are perpetrators, many women who are capable of violence. And in our society, we think of women as not being capable of violence.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think you made a really, really good point when you talked about, I'm going to try to say it again, but you talked about, should I just let them continue to say he, or should I
Yep.
clarify for them to let them recognize that domestic violence happens in other relationships as well?
Yep.
You know, and I
And
think
that's,
you said it's
yeah.
important to do it, to correct them.
And that's the thing that many people in the LGBT community struggle with, because I have many transgender clients who have had intimate partner abuse, and the police will come out and they're struggling with, well, how do I make them use my pronouns and then have them understand, because it gets off track, because the police will start to say, okay, well, is this person male? And they start to get into all these questions that are irrelevant, questions about gender that are inappropriate, when this person the fact is, we have a human being who is scared of another human being, and it really should stop there.
I love that. That was so basic, so simple, so black and white. A human being afraid of another human being. And we talked about it a little bit earlier before we got live, but we talked about how those moments that you're to try to figure things out, someone's life is in danger.
Yep.
As the moment pass, someone's life is in danger, and you're sitting there trying to figure out, what's not relevant. Oh, really? So do you go he or she, or what do you go by when someone's life is in danger?
Yeah. And sometimes, I mean, these minutes, these seconds that it comes down to when you're calling the police and you have someone with a weapon or someone who's coming after you, if that person hesitates for a second to think, what is this person's gender? What pronoun? Those seconds can mean the difference between life and death. And if we stop to have our own biases or our own questions about sexuality or anything like that, that's enough that it gives that perpetrator that extra time.
Yeah, it does. And for lack of knowledge, they realize that they're giving this person more time to continue to do what they're doing. There was a question. I'm going to try to go back up and see if we can address it. Do you think that females you accuse of being, but Esther, do you see it?
I did, and then it went up. That they're defending themselves. I don't want to misquote you, Esther, but my knowledge of technology is not that good. So I think Esther said, do you think that the females are actually acting in self-defense? Did I read that correctly?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what she's saying. I think so, but I'm not quite sure. Esther, if you want to rephrase that, we want to make sure that we answer you correctly. We're not talking about reactive abuse. We're talking about
we're definitely not talking, and I definitely want to say that we're not talking about reactive abuse. If someone comes after you and they're abusing you, and you react in self-defense, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about perpetrators who instigate and inflict the abuse, who are women.
Right, absolutely. That's what we're talking about. I have a trans daughter who was abused by their spouse before they came out because they didn't accept my child, their spouse, for whom they are. And we were talking about that a little bit earlier too, because one of the reasons that they stay silent within the relationships because they're afraid of being outed. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. And so the first thing I want to say is that I always hesitate to speak about trans experiences. I have no experience no lived experience as a trans person. So I really can only speak to helping them as a clinician and as their therapist of the people who I have known. And so I never want to take a voice away from people who are already marginalized and in many areas voiceless. So I do want to speak to my experience as a clinician. That is so common. They are stigmatized and they are put in situations where they are sometimes even made worse. So everything from the legal system to the jails, to where are we going to put people and what happens now, and not viewing a certain gender as being capable of certain types of violence, and not viewing certain genders of being capable of being survivors or being victims of certain types of violence is a huge problem too, because I've had many patients who will call the police. The police think that they're hearing a man's voice on the other line, and the police are like, oh, this person's fine. Now, does it happen in all situations? Absolutely not. But it happens enough that people are scared and that people do feel like they can't go forward. And we have a real issue in our society with, especially trans women who are victims of rape and of intimate partner abuse and violence and all kinds of crimes, and is so underreported.
And I think the underreporting too comes in where they don't want to, the partner has threatened that they're going to out them. Your family doesn't know that you're gay or lesbian or homosexual. So therefore, if you tell them that about the domestic violence, and of course, well, I'm going to tell them that you're gay or whatever, and that keeps them trapped, and they know that, so they use that to their advantage. So let me go back up. You're a little bit fuzzy, a little bit. I don't know if anything changed with you, Katie, but it's a little bit like.
My cat thinks he's a therapy cat, and he tried to walk on the screen, but I think we're good now.
Okay. Hold on. I'm going to try to go back up. Hey, from Australia. Hey. So glad you're in here. Hey, from Massachusetts. I have a question. If my abuser started it and I yelled back, does that mean he instigated it and caused me to react? I'll let you answer that. Psychotherapist.
Okay. If my abuser started it and I yelled back, does that mean he instigated it and caused me to react? That's a hard one. Because I don't know what you mean by started it. I don't know if we're talking about physical, emotional abuse. Not that I'm trying to say one is necessarily better or worse. But the thing is that now to kind of piggyback off of that statement, which Dusty, I'm not sure if I don't want to misquote you or go in a different direction, but a lot of times that can happen with abusers is that it's covert abuse. So, we think of abuse as being, a punch to the jaw, a shove, threatening with a weapon. That's obvious. It's black and white. But things like name calling, things like belittling a person, a human can only take so much of that before they yell back or before they react. So there's a difference between reaction to abuse and abuse. And I definitely want to say absolutely. That.
Yeah, there is a big difference. And I think that Melanie just touched on it where she said many times victims who are fighting back are identified as perpetrators by law enforcement, people who have never been in trouble with the law. And unfortunately, that's a very, very true comment. And an unfortunate one. Did you want to touch on that a little bit, Katie? You're still a little blurry.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, am I good now?
A little blurry, but you can keep going. We can hear you fine.
Okay. So Melanie said many times victims who are fighting back are identified as perpetrators by law enforcement. Absolutely. I see that all the time in my practice, that people who are victims who are trying to survive in an abnormal environment and they are reacting to their abnormal environment. So they're having a normal reaction to an abnormal environment. They are oftentimes in the court system targeted as being perpetrators, or it is referred to as a tit for tat situation because people really don't know, and the abuse is so covert. And then Melanie also said, I've heard from every gay and trans client I've worked with that threats of being outed. And I wanted to touch on that while I see it on my screen. That is huge. There are people that I talk to every day who say, I can't report this to the police. I will be outed. I will lose my job. I will lose my family. I could lose my children. And that is a reality.
That's a big deal, Katie. Yeah, that's a devastating reality. That's really hard. And it's not because of the domestic violence, it's because of the sexual orientation. And that's just unfair. And it shouldn't be that way. And that's why I thought having a conversation was so important, because you honestly people need to put aside their own stigmas and their own, get over themselves and help people who need help. And if someone is stuck in a domestic violence relationship, regardless, they deserve the same care, whether it's a man, a woman, or anyone from the LGBTQ plus community, they deserve to be treated fairly, period. They deserve the support and respect anyone else would get. So hey, from Boston, Tahisha, I wanted to touch on something real quick, and I think I just forgot what it was. I was going to say reactive abuse. Like, this is when I was married, the abuse was just getting to be too much. It was just went on forever. And one day we were in the kitchen, and one day I told the story of the life, but like I grabbed a knife he was tearing me up beating me up. He was very violent. So I grabbed the kitchen. We were in the kitchen. I grabbed the knife and I was like, and I held it like this, y'all. Like literally, it was like I was just sitting here like this, and and then of course I was like, leave me alone. I didn't do anything. I threw it in the sink, but I was so terrified. I was literally just trying to protect myself and trying to make him stop. Well, of course, eventually when I get divorced and we get in front of the magistrate judge, and he tells the judge, she pulled the knife. And I'm like
Yeah.
hysterically weeping. I'm losing it because I'm like, no, 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 but wait. And that's another thing too. Okay, so I was hysterical. I was like, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. I was trying to defend myself, and the judge looks at me and he goes, "Did you pull the knife?" I'm like, yes, but that was
Yeah.
it. He didn't want to hear another
Yeah.
thing about what I had to say. And it's so frustrating because it's so unfair. So that's another part of the reactive abuse. But another thing is when you talk
Perfect
about the
example.
covert, you talk about the
That's a
covert abuse where, sorry, it's a little delayed.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's a perfect example. And I noticed someone said, I know Dusty said, "What's reaction to abuse?" And that's kind of like what Lisa was just saying. Was
Mm-hmm.
she took it, she took it, and she took it, and she took it, and she took it, and then eventually, your instinct as a human is to protect yourself. If you have children, your instinct is to protect your children. And so that nothing trumps that. So if you have someone coming at you in a physical way, your instinct is to grab. I mean, for me, when my ex was breaking down my door, now I know many of y'all aren't from New Orleans, but we have these like random little like toilet bowl cleaners that they throw out during Mardi Gras, and no one else would ever have that in their living room except for someone from New Orleans. So I don't have any weapon, and that was the closest thing I could grab. And that was instinctual. We think, what do I have near me that could protect me?
Protect myself.
So that is a reaction. That is a reaction to abuse.
That was a good example too. And no, I don't know if anybody else from New Orleans, except for those in New Orleans, have these toilets.
No one knows what I'm even talking about, I'm sure.
So another thing I want to talk about, covert abuse. Now, you ever seen a situation where the abuser's maybe nagging her, attacking her, even verbally, you know what I mean? And all of a sudden someone comes and she's hysterical, she's crying, she looks like she's losing it. And then it's like, well, look at him. Police gets there, look at him, he's so calm. And obviously you were the one who instigated the situation because look how hysterical you're, not realizing the trauma that this person has endured. So anyway, I just have to put that out there.
And that's the thing, that the police really aren't trained when they come out to domestic violence situations, and they see things very black and white. She's crying, he's calm.
Oftentimes I see it all the time, I think that if our law enforcement people were just educated on that fact, then they would be like, okay, just because he's calm doesn't mean that he's not a perpetrator. I'm in distracted by the comments, but I want to address more.
I know there's so many good ones.
I know. Lauren asks, I'm a woman and sometimes I'm scared that I'm being emotionally abusive to my partners. I'm a survivor of intimate partner violence, which causes me to have pretty intense reactions to small irritations. Any tips on how to overcome this? I'll let you go for that one, Katie.
Okay, that's a good one. If you think that you're having some reactions towards partners that are a little intense, I think you scrolled up. I think you used the word verbally abusive. I don't want to misquote you.
Okay, you can see when I scroll. Okay, there it is.
Okay. No, I don't see it. Okay.
But she's emotionally abusive. She thinks that she might be emotionally abusive to her partners based off of her past triggers.
Yeah, I'm being emotionally abusive. Okay. So if you think that you're having some of those reactions, I first want you to remember, okay, you're human. You're probably having some trauma from situations that you've been through. Usually what I do for people is I recommend take a breath. That's the first thing, because when we start to have a reaction, a heightened reaction, we are not breathing. We're breathing, of course, because we're staying alive, but we're not really breathing. Our breath gets shallow. We get dehydrated. The more anxiety goes up. And so it's harder to think rationally. So I always tell my individuals, I tell couples, take 10. Now that's hard to do in the moment. It is. It's going to take practice, but I say take 10. If you notice your heart rate getting up, things like that. The first thing is awareness, and that's what you're doing, which is good.
Yeah. I'd like to kind of piggyback. Oh, sorry. Go.
No, go ahead. I was going to read Melanie's comment about.
Okay. I was going to piggyback off of what she said too, and I think like Katie said, you're human. Have some grace for yourself, but I also have to recognize that we have to heal properly. We have to take the time to really heal, and so that we don't carry into our next relationship the trauma and stuff that has been done to us or how we've learned to react to it. Though I don't think they necessarily go away 100%. I think it's something that, like you said, Katie, we take a breath. We're like, okay, this is personal. They didn't do anything to me. This is me. You know, you may say, I'm sorry, I reacted that way. That was me. I'm sorry. It triggered me. It reminded me of something. But I think taking the time to journal or write some stuff down, kind of figuring out what
Yes.
triggers you, Lauren, might be really helpful. So that you know that if something like that comes up, that you take a breath. But I also think if you're with a partner now, that you need to share some of those things with them. Hey,
Yes.
I'm really sensitive about this. Please don't do this. So that they can
I was
help,
just about to say
you
that.
know, yeah, they can help you out. All right.
Yeah, I was
Sorry.
just about to say that communication is really the key. I mean, tell your partner what you've been through. And I'm not saying it's an excuse, but I'm a reason. You know, it's a reason. I did want to talk about Melanie. She mentioned battered women syndrome. She talked about women who spent years in we call it battered women syndrome because this term was coined many, many years before I was born. So it really should be battered spouse or battered partner syndrome. But battered syndrome, what she's talking about is women who, many of you have maybe heard of Lorena Bobbitt. She was abused for years and years, and physical, sexual, emotional, financial, and she reacted in a violent, drastically violent way. I'll let y'all read the details on your own about that. But it was really one of the first cases that we allowed a woman to, our survivor of domestic violence, to come forward and say, this is what happened to me and this is why I reacted this way. And then they're doing more and more research about that comes into what I was saying earlier about reaction to abuse versus abuse. You know, we're human. Our instinct is to protect ourselves, and we can only take so much before we react back. The key that I really want for my takeaway message for people is to get out before it gets to that point. If you're finding that you're having to grab a weapon, if you're finding that you're reacting, get support.
Yeah, that's really important because I know you'll see in the news, stories of so many women who have gone to jail for killing their spouse.
Yes.
The story, if you listen or hear more, there was a lot of domestic violence, but it was unknown. It wasn't documented. It wasn't tracked. You know, she didn't use her voice. She didn't say anything. Or he didn't say anything. And I know I was reading one story of a man who was killed by his female partner, and he said it's going to be okay. He told everybody, "Don't worry about it. She's not going to do anything," and she killed him. So staying silent, can be very, very dangerous. Okay, so let me see. I want to make sure we touch on some of the other things that I know we want to talk about. So we talk about threatening to out their partner. Oh, you wanted to talk about how leaving is a process, and I know that they can stem for anyone who wants to leave a domestic abusive relationship.
So I always say this to my clients, my patients. I always say leaving is not an event. It's a process. A lot of times in society, we think, okay, they left the relationship, they're safe now. That's not necessarily true. As someone said earlier, that's usually when the abuse can get a lot worse. That's sometimes the most unsafe time for a person who is leaving. And I read somewhere in a book that the average abuse victim leaves 7 times before they actually really leave. You know, because sometimes you leave in your head. Sometimes you leave by telling your mom, okay, I'm going to leave. You know, then you leave by making arrangements for the children. You know, there's all these steps to leaving. It's not like you just walk out one day, pack a bag and go. A lot of these people, their lives are intertwined. It's a whole process. And sometimes the perpetrator doesn't react to it well. So there's many conversations. There's many ways that you need to have a safety plan. There's so many different steps that go into it that it's definitely not an event. It's not like a one and done.
Right. And if you have to come back 7 times, 8 times, that's fine. You have to save your life and whatever it means. If it wasn't safe for you to leave right then, well, then you can leave later. But don't feel bad for not being able to leave right then and there. You leave when it's safest for you. And I wanted to touch on something someone said a little bit earlier. I'm not going to say her name, but she talks about having her partner for 27 years. I mean, now divorced, but still afraid. I mean, 27 years is a long time to have experienced such trauma, such domestic violence. So the fact that you're still afraid, it's okay. It's okay. It takes time. That's 27 years. That's a big chunk of your life. So I'd encourage you to have some grace
Yeah.
with yourself. Find some additional support and resources that can help you deal with the fear that you still deal with. It's okay. It's okay. And
Yes.
sometimes
And I always wanted
this fear
to,
can also, so that's
huh?
not always a bad thing. I said the fear is not always a
Yeah.
bad thing as long as it's keeping you aware of the surroundings. Because, like you said, even after you're gone, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily safe.
Yes. Absolutely.
Did you want to say something? Or I'm going to do the next the comment over here. Because Lisa said, I wanted to add that domestic violence can affect victims that aren't intimate partners but are intimate family. Absolutely. My father abused
Yes.
her. Nobody who was in a do anything wanted to help, even when I was leaving. Yeah, that's devastatingly true. People need to recognize that domestic violence can happen within a family as well. Yeah.
And that's another thing
Right.
too, because a lot of it, I mean, we're changing now, it's 2020, but even, even in past 10, 15, 20 years, I mean, like when my mom was growing up, there were no child abuse laws. Like you didn't get involved. Now, as a social worker, I get involved in that stuff every day. And so a lot has changed, but there still is a lot of stigma and a lot of this expectation of, okay, well, let people discipline their children.
Yeah. You're kind of breaking up. I don't know if you stopped. Okay, so let's talk about let's see, the he and she, we talked about with the police. So let's talk about the fact that there's not a lot of awareness about domestic violence in the LGBT community. I think that's a really, really important part too, because the fact you if you don't know, you don't know. You can't help someone,
Yeah.
or it's hard to help well, I should say that. It's hard to help someone well without the correct knowledge and information. And so we talked about it being underreported. People are being fearful of coming forward about it. So let's talk about that.
Yes.
What kind of awareness needs to be taught? What needs to be put out there? Who needs to be educated on this topic?
So we really need to really teach the community and even empower the LGBT community, themselves, ourselves, because there is a stigma in the community. I mean, a lot of us feel like we've come so far. We're only able to get married. I believe it was 2016, if not 2014. I mean, that's a handful of years ago. Before then, we weren't even recognized as having real relationships, and so it's hard to prove that you have been abused in a relationship when society doesn't even really view it as a real relationship. It's kind of like trying to convince society that you've been abused by a roommate, which is essentially what people had to do. My roommate did this. My friend did this. So the big thing is really just empowerment of us, of the LGBT community, and education for society. I think that the legal system, everything from the police to judges, really just need some more awareness. I hate to use the word training because training implies that it's like you sit for an 8-hour class and then you kind of are like, you've learned it, and that's not necessarily true. But just, yeah, like just being, and I mean, like, you can sit for a class and you can learn something, but to really be the one you are making the decisions for these people's lives. Judges every day, we're human and we all have biases. We all have opinions. And judges every day are making decisions of whether or not these survivors are, could benefit from a protection order or not. And the fact that we have to prove to these judges, the fact that we have to prove to the police. So I think education from the legal system, and I also think education of mental health professionals too. A lot of us really need to learn and educate ourselves. There are a lot of stigmas that we, only viewing perpetrators as being male, for example, thinking that abuse doesn't happen in the LGBT community. I hear that a lot from colleagues, oh, well, y'all don't have these problems. And we do. It's just not, not as talked about.
Exactly. It's not talked about, and the statistics aren't out there to really prove how high the numbers are, because like I posted a little bit earlier, the numbers are what the research is showing is that the numbers are equally as high as those in heterosexual relationships. And so there's really no big difference. It's just that it's not talked about because it's uncomfortable. Some people don't want to talk about it. They don't have enough knowledge or lack of awareness. But Scott said, if you don't know, you don't know. And that's exactly true. Tisha said there isn't enough awareness for the LGBT community, and which is a very good point. And that's why exactly why we're talking about it. And if I would add, have some gentleness and respect and care for those who may not be like you, they may be different, but they still deserve to be treated with love and care, and deserve to be as safe as you want to be. You know, to me, it's kind of basic. Like it's that practical. You know.
I like also the statement, different forms of stalking and technology abuse. I mean, that is a huge part too, because, you know, when we think of domestic violence, we think of physical violence. You know, a quick Google search will show us images of physical violence, and the court system prioritizes physical violence, and rightfully so, because it's not acceptable. But absolutely things like stalking, things that people have to use other ways to really get their abuse across to the survivor.
Yeah. Melanie said, I've done this work for 30, all those numbers, I can only count on two hands. The number of self-identified LGBTQ plus clients who have come to shelter, and every one of them talks about judgment based on how they identified. And I mean, that's got to be really hard. Out of 30 years, just you can count them on two hands. So basically, you know, we need to create the support. We need to create the education and awareness. And I think they do need training, ongoing training, where you do sit there and you learn it. You know what I mean? And you come back and learn it again, because as the world changes, we need to learn more about what's happening. I mean, think about COVID. COVID came, all of a sudden we were learning online learning. We're learning how to create masks that we adapt. So, I mean, I'm just saying, let's learn how we can help people who are in different situations who may not be what we identify that, you know, what's normal in domestic violence.
And I definitely, while I have the comment up here, I really want to piggyback on something Melanie said. A lot of times, I mean, things, you know, Melanie mentioned shelters. Shelters, that's a huge thing that I come across in my practice, is that many of my trans women patients are not accepted at local shelters. And that happens all the time. And so
where do they go? What's the issue for them? Where do they go?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that happens all the time. And, yeah. And, you know, for when we think of like battered women's shelters and stuff like that, I mean, of course they should really be battered people's shelters, but we really, the screening process will wean out a lot of the LGBT community right there, just because the questions are so intrusive and so uncomfortable, and they really out people in a very dangerous way.
And I think even though they're just starting to have, I mean, I know that they do, but they're just now starting to have shelters where men can go with their children, you know?
Yeah.
And so,
and I noticed that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So just now. All right. What else? Let's see. So education decreases stigma. Imagine that.
Yes.
If you're educated and you're aware of this, it decreases the stigma, because you're like, oh no, this is how you handle the situation. Oh, no, this is what they need, because you're educated and aware about that. Can you talk a little bit about that, Katie?
So the more that we educate ourselves and other people, the more that we know. And I think we quoted earlier that, you know, the more that you know, the more you know. A lot of times we don't realize, as clinicians, as treating providers, the damage that we can do to a victim by not understanding what's going on. I've had a lot of what I refer to as well-meaning bad advice. And that's actually a term that I have used in my book, that talks about, you know, everything from, you know, your great aunt at the Thanksgiving table that says, you know, don't leave, you know, don't leave. Oh, that was just a one-time thing. It was just their drinking. It was just yada, yada. And I always want to say to people, there's a lot of well-meaning bad advice that is intended to keep survivors there. And so I always want to say that, you know, educating ourselves, even as survivors, we can be educated, because a lot of times there's a lot of guilt that comes with, should I have left? Should I have given them another chance? Was it my fault? Did I provoke it? So I really think education is really for all of us, for survivors, Absolutely for the legal teams, clinicians. The more that we learn really about what a perpetrator entails, like what the abuse entails, and what a victim is sometimes experiencing, and the things that could help a victim who needs to get out.
So education decreases stigma, and decreased stigma increases safety. Because once they realize have any stigmas or that people are educated about it, we can now open our doors to provide safety for those victims and survivors who need it. And I think that was a really, really important part we talked about earlier, is that decreasing. So education decreases the stigma, and decreasing the stigma increases safety for survivors.
I like that.
And so I don't know. I don't know if you wanted to touch on anything else, but I want to give you guys a couple minutes. We have Katie for a few more minutes. She is an LCSW and psychotherapist. If you have any specific questions, we'll give you a few minutes to ask them over in the comments before we free her and let her go. I don't know if you want to touch on anything in the comments either, Katie.
I did see a comment that says the DA only prosecutes about 20% of cases, and I do want to say something about that. And until you really go through the court process to obtain a protection order, you really have no idea what it entails. A lot of times we say to survivors, or we say to victims who have been hurt, we'll say, well, why didn't you get a protection order? We don't know. I mean, that's an innocent statement from people who really just don't know, but we don't know what that entails. A protection order is not easy to get. It takes many months, sometimes thousands of dollars. You have to really prove yourself. You have to be re-victimized, re-traumatized. And you are really put on the witness stand, literally and figuratively, to tell your story. And anything can and will be used against you. In your case with the knife, I've had patients who had screenshots of text messages or things like that used against them, and they didn't get their protection order because of a text message, or because of
terrible.
Yeah.
That's terrible. So anybody have any questions? Gape said, is there a curriculum for teaching this to others? I learned all of this stuff on my own, but as a teacher, I would love to know if there's a good guide to go by to help others. That's a great question.
That is a good question.
It was really hard to find it. It was just really hard to find the research out there.
So that is one of the things that, first and foremost, probably the biggest thing that I found when I've been trying to do my research for the book that I'm writing, is the fact that there really isn't a lot out there to educate people. There are websites, there's information out there. A lot of it is going to be individualized. So, doing a lot of education about working with the LGBT community might not necessarily be also inclusive of an educational system that would include domestic abuse. It might be that you have to do both of those types of education on your own. And
separately.
Yeah. And then that's really the biggest thing is there are websites I always like to tell people about. There's the Gay Men's Domestic Violence Project. It's glbtqdvp.org. That talks a lot about intimate partner violence within the LGBT community. And I always tell people that that's a website that has a lot of information. We are really working as a society to get further inclusive of this type of information. Laura said, I know that dating violence is still undereducated to teenagers in school. What about LGBT teens? How would you advise them? Yeah, that's another thing that. That's another thing that I always want to talk about is young people. I mean, they're very vulnerable because we have, young people really at the mercy of systems that they don't really have any control over. And so they are learning about themselves, they're learning about their community and their peers. And I want to go back. Melanie said training at local agencies. That's a huge thing too. So for my teens, I work a lot with teens. Training at local agencies, empowering yourself to learn about what's going on in young people's lives, maybe learning terminology that they use to describe themselves can make a huge difference.
I think Laura made a good point. She says they're still finding themselves. So we try to focus too on teen dating violence, period. February is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. And the thing is, statistics are 1 in 3. I think I'm right. 1 in 3 for teens and youth as well for domestic violence, from like teenagers all the way up to young youth. So it's important. These numbers are just as high as women. 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men, 1 in 3 youth. That number just blows my mind. That means youth, young people, teenagers are engaging in they have domestic violence relationships. They're in abusive relationships at such a young age. So getting into the schools, having programs where they're being educated, having violence-free homes. So we're living a violence-free home that they can see for themselves is also very, very important.
Yeah, and that's what I would say. Like, you know, teens are finding themselves, and things like using, if you have a teenager who says, these are my pronouns, and you use those pronouns, and the child says to you, this is my name, and you use that name, things like that may to you seem like something small, or may seem like they're trying to act out and be defiant. Those are the things that will tell that teen that you are a safe person to go to, because a lot of times kids, they don't know who to go to, who's safe, what adult is safe. Those are questions that they have.
I remember I was working as a violence prevention specialist at a middle school. And one of the students, she came to me, she says, I identify as they and them. And I said, okay, darling, you are they and them. I respect, however, because what it did was it let her know that I cared about her. I respected her, and she was welcome into my office, and that became her safe space because I was willing to identify her. And I shared that with her teachers as well. Identify her how she wants to be respected and treated well. Give that gift to her so that because she's already struggling within herself. And so that was one thing that I did that was really important. Katie, you're frozen too, by the way. I don't know if you're unfrozen yet.
Weird.
Agape said as susceptible to mental abuse as adults, if not so more. Shame, guilting, and isolation are things they try to navigate. Yeah, very, very true. They're really sensitive at this age too. So they're really susceptible to a lot. So surrounding them with love and care is really important. All right. Anything else you wanted to say, Katie, before we let you go? I'm so glad that you came on. Thank you for taking the time to share your story and educating people on this. I'm going to put some more websites actually up that she had. So you're frozen again. Are you back? womenagainstabuse.org. Are you back, Katie?
Okay. And I want to say something about that one because that's one of the first websites that I give to my patients. And I always tell them, I get it. The word woman is in the title. We are an evolving process in our society. Ideally, someday that will say people against abuse. A lot of these websites, or these groups were created many, many years ago, or many with, maybe it's just a bunch of women who wanted to be against abuse, but it does perpetuate that stereotype. So I always want to kind of give that disclaimer. But that's one of the first things that I usually say to people about that. And then network, lared.org. That's another website that will give resources and support for LGBT youth, LGBT adults, and domestic violence within the community.
Oh, I love it. Yes, yes. And if you guys want to reach out to Katie, you can find her website on the bottom of the screen, www.kaytlyn, Kaytlyn, that's spelling, Kaytlyn, JillisLCW.com. She's amazing. She specializes. If you have questions, you need, therapy services, you guys reach out to her. She does this with her heart and passion. And be ready because her book is coming out soon. And you guys, you're not going to find a lot of material on domestic violence in the LGBTQ community. So get ready to grab this book. When it's ready, we'll have her back on. All right. Oh, I missed all these comments. Hold on. Okay. Okay, awesome. Thank you, guys. All right, so glad you guys joined us. Katie, anything else you want to share before we go?
So my big thing that I want to tell people is if you are in any type of situation like this, please seek support. Whether it's audiobooks, Facebook groups, actual books like hard books, talking to a therapist. Do not suffer in silence, because that's one of the biggest indicators of a survivor not reporting, is that they are really suffering in silence and they don't know who to turn to. And they are really just having all of this information in their head, and they don't know, is this abuse? Is this dangerous? Is it going to get worse? And a lot of times they get stuck on the it'll get better type of mentality. We all tell ourselves that it'll stop. And that can be the most dangerous thing for a survivor. So I always tell people, whatever the support is, there's no judgment. If you have a rabbi, you have a priest, someone who you can go to, there's no judgment of who it is. Just go to someone.
Yeah.
Do not suffer in silence.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree to piggyback on that. Like, it doesn't matter what you identify with. Just know that you do not deserve to be abused or hurt by anyone at any time for any reason. And so we just want you to know that you're loved and you're cared about, and you deserve to be free and whole. So thank you guys so much for joining us. And amen. All right. So anyway, thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you later. Thanks, Katie. See you guys.
Thanks, everyone.